This lesson is part 1 on completing the square. Before you start the lesson, you need to take your page of foldables and you want to cut it into the 4 separate strips before we get started. So if you haven't done that yet, you're going to want to pause this video for a minute, cut out the 4 strips, put them aside, and then you'll be ready to go. All right, so completing the square. Completing the square is a process that we can follow to turn a quadratic that's in standard form. So that's something that looks like this one here, so the 2x squared plus 20x plus 9, and turns it into vertex form, which is this, 2 times x plus 5 squared minus 41. Why would you want to do that? Well, we've been graphing in this form, so if you want to graph by transformations, it's very handy to be able to turn this into this. It also helps us with maximum and minimum and some of the word problems that we're going to be doing. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to start on this side and we're going to expand what's in vertex form into standard form. So I see 2x plus 5 squared minus 41. So the first thing I notice that I need to tackle are the brackets in the exponent if I follow my BEDMAS rules. So I want to multiply out x plus 5 squared. So the easiest way to do that is to do x plus 5 times x plus 5. That's what square means. Okay, to multiply out x plus 5 times x plus 5, I am going to FOIL it out. So we do our first brackets first. So I'm going to leave that 2 in front. And then x times x is x squared. Then do your outsides. So that's 5x. Your insides, that's also 5x. And your lasts, which is 25. I'm going to collect the like terms in my bracket. There's only a single x squared. I have 2 terms with an x, so 5x and 5x make 10x. And then there's that 25. So now that I've multiplied out the square, I'm then going to multiply everything in this bracket by 2 so that I will not have brackets anymore. So we're going to sprinkle or distribute that 2 through the bracket. So 2 times x squared is 2x squared. 2 times 10x is 20x. And 2 times 25 is 50 minus 41. Last thing I need to do is just collect up the remainder of my terms. I have 2x squared plus 20x plus 50 take away 41 is 9. You'll notice that this is the same thing as our next question where it says we want to write this into vertex form. And we use the same one so that we can look at the steps that it took us to get into standard form and see if we can find a way to work backwards to get it into vertex form. We'll also know whether or not we're right because we should end up with 2x plus 5 squared minus 41 when we're done. So to do the completing the square part, we are going to use those pages that you cut out, and there should be 4 of them. Just zoom out a little here. And what you want to do is you want to arrange them so that there's a little bit of a gap between each page. So maybe a couple of centimeters so that they don't all line up. Try to keep it roughly the same so that they're all not quite overlapping. There's a little bit there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to fold this in half so that you now have 4 flaps at the bottom and 4 flaps at the top, and you want to leave yourself some space so that it should make a whole bunch of tabs. I know that's hard to see with the glare. Maybe that might make it a little easier. So when I folded it here so that I left a little bit of space there so that I now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 little flaps that I can now use. Now if you have a stapler, this would be a good time to staple this. And if you don't have a stapler, you can bring it to class tomorrow and staple it there. So I'm just going to staple at the very top along that crease. Let's see if I can turn this back off. Along here so that the pages now hold, and I can flip up each page as I go. And what we're going to do is fill in each of these and then write instructions on each step. So the first thing we want to do is we want to complete the square on 2x squared plus 20x plus 9. So on that very first little flap, and maybe it would help if I put something underneath so that we can see which flap we're on each time. There we go. I'm going to write complete the square. And y equals 2x squared plus 20x plus 9. And that's our first starter step there. Zoom in a little. Okay. All right, so if I take a look, what I want to do is I want to see if we can find a way to work backwards. And the problem is that I am not going to be able to go from this step to this step. I have no idea. If I hadn't seen the 50 minus 41, I would not know what I did to get that 9. But there is a way for us to get from this step here to this step here, except it's not just going to take one step, it's going to take a couple. So we're going to break it down into the steps that we're going to follow. We're going to write them down as we go. And then hopefully in about 3 or 4 steps, we'll have found a way to get back to this from this. So the first thing I see is that there's a bracket. And I also see that the 2 that was in front here has now been factored out front. There's some other things going on in here, but that's where we're going to start. We're going to start by grouping together the 2 terms that have an x in them, and we are going to factor out the coefficient that was in front of the x squared. So if I do that, if I group together the 2 things that had an x in them, and I factor out the number in front, that's going to be 2, and then we'll have an x squared, and then 2 times 10 gives me 20x, and we're going to leave that 9 alone. So it's really tempting to take out the x because they do have that in common, but we're going to resist. So on this flap up here, I'm going to write down what we did. So we grouped together with an x, or x squared, and then we factored out the coefficient of x squared. Right, that's what we did to get that. We put together our 2 terms that had x's, and then we factored out whatever was in front of that x squared. Okay, so that got me at least a little bit towards the first step. So at least we now have a bracket and we have a 2 in front. However, I have a 25 here that we clearly don't have there, and the 41 on the outside does not match my plus 9. So I still have a little ways to go. So to do the next part, what I want to do is I want to stretch out my bracket into a trinomial that I can factor. And in order to do that, I'm going to try to find a number that would make this factorable. So x squared plus 10x plus something that factors nicely. And I would really like it to factor to be a perfect square in the end. So we're going to have to put a little thought into what we do here. I know you can see from here that the numbers were 5 and 5, but I don't know that when I'm just looking at this, so we need to find a way to figure that out. So we're going to stretch this into 4 terms. Sorry, I take that back into 3 terms. And we want to find the missing number that's going to go in there. So we're going to stretch the bracket into a trinomial. And then we want to find a number that we can put in that third slot to make it factor. Now, finding the number that will make it factor sounds really tricky. We are looking for something that obviously it's going to, if we think about how we factor, normally we would multiply the first number and the last number and then look for something that multiplies to that and adds to the middle. We're doing the same thing here. So I want something that multiplies to, well, I don't really know what it's going to be, and it's going to add to give me 10. So we are looking for two numbers, right, that are going to add to give me 10 and multiply to give me something. And there are a lot of numbers that add to 10, so I do have a lot of choice here. But I would like them to be the same two numbers. That's the trick here. They need to be the same two numbers. So the numbers that I would like to pick are things that would be the same number that adds to give me 10. So 5 plus 5 would give me 10. A trick for doing that is you can take 10 and divide it by 2, and that would help you find the numbers a little bit more easily. And then 5 times 5 is 25, and this is what I like to call the magic number, because that's the number that's going to help me factor here. So step 2 that we've done is just to stretch it out and find the magic number. And then our next step down is going to be to actually put the magic number in. Now the problem is if I add 25 into my bracket, I've now just changed the equation, and I can't change the equation. That breaks the laws of math. So what I want to do is I want to cancel out what I've done. So I'm actually going to subtract back out that 25. Even though it seems really strange and it seems like we're wasting our time, I promise you it will work out. So what we've done is we found our magic number, and then we're going to add it into the bracket to make that trinomial that will factor, right? It'll give me that x squared plus 10x plus 25, but I have to cancel that 25 back out because otherwise this isn't the same question anymore. So for this step, we're going to add and subtract the magic number into the bracket. All right, well, we are getting closer. We've got that 2. We've got the x squared plus 10x plus 25. We just have to work out what's going on with that negative 25 and that plus 9, and we should be good to go. So on our next little tab down here, what we're going to do is you'll notice here the minus 25 is not in the bracket. So what we're going to do is we're going to get that minus 25 out of the bracket. But unfortunately, the only way I can get it out is to multiply it by 2 to FOIL it out of the bracket. So that's going to be our next step, is we're going to multiply that negative 25 by 2 to get it out of the bracket. So 2 times negative 25 is negative 50 plus 9. So what did I do? We multiplied, so we removed the negative number from the bracket by multiplying by the number in front of the bracket. Now I am going to need to pause the video here for a minute and then start up in the next one, or I'm going to run out.